Hey guys, it's Dr. Kim here. We had another great call-in radio show, episode 11 tonight, where we talked a lot about nutrition. A caller called in and asked about how can they do a better job sticking to a diet and preventing relapse. So we talked a lot about sort of using different behavioral strategies to manage that, avoiding sort of extreme diets, finding something that they're much more willing to do and able to sustain long term. The idea of incorporating cheat meals or cheat days as part of that, avoiding sort of refined seed oils, making sure that they can and realize they can eat healthy sort of meats, and the red meat is actually not bad for you. And also about satisfying their sweet tooth in terms of eating fruits and kind of ketogenic chocolate and ice cream alternatives that they can substitute instead of carb-loaded, sugar-laden kind of desserts. In addition, we had a great question about maintaining mental health for young people during quarantine. Talked a lot about increasing walking, increasing physical activity, decreasing screen time, and dopamine fasting to get away from that, and finding ways to socialize and maintain our connections during this difficult time. So if you want to learn about all those things and more, tune into today's episode. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Wonderful.
Yeah, so I guess my question that I proposed last week was about my diet. And so I've been trying to come off a highly processed standard American diet for about 12 months now. And every time I try to move on from that diet, I typically revert back to it somehow. I've tried different diets. I've tried plant-based, I've tried carnivore, I've tried keto, but they never seem to stick. And I'm not sure if it's my mentality, or maybe if I'm thinking about it incorrectly, or I'm just kind of figure out what ways I should be thinking about tackling this problem.
Yeah, it's a great question. It doesn't sound like it's from a lack of trying, given the number and variety of diets that you have tried. So why don't we just start from the beginning? Like, what is your baseline diet? When you say standard American diet, what is the diet that you always kind of, fall back upon?
Mostly sandwiches, I guess. Sandwiches and chips, potatoes, like burgers, I would say. Like high carbs.
Okay. And are you making these sandwiches? Or are you going out to like fast food places and grabbing a burger or a sandwich?
90% of the time, it's just I'm going out to eat.
Okay, that makes sense. So it sounds like it's kind of become like a default, fallback kind of behavior. So tell me a little bit, like walk me through the process of when, you're doing one of these diets, right? You're trying to stick to whether it's carnivore or plant-based or keto or whatever it is that you're doing. And then what do you notice around the times when you start slipping? Have you noticed any triggers or things that make you more likely to relapse?
Yeah, so I actually feel pretty good, like within the first week. But then after that, I'll notice I'll lose a lot of energy. I'll get really groggy. I just, on carnivore, most recently, I just never felt like I had any energy at all. I was just like, I wasn't tired, but I wasn't energetic as I like to be. And I guess that's what really made me revert back. And then also, at times when I'll get like hungry, or if I don't like prepare the night before, I'll get hungry and I'll just use that as an opportunity to just go eat out.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it sounds like a little bit of like there's a motivational barrier. You're kind of feeling tired or lazy, and it's like, oh, it takes so much work for me to prepare food, so might as well just go out to eat.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So just to play devil's advocate, when you do go out to eat, is it possible for you to find a healthy choice when you go out?
Yeah, for the most part it is. But then I tell myself, well, if I'm going to eat out, might as well enjoy it. Kind of my mentality.
Totally. I think you are susceptible to the might as well virus that I think we're all highly susceptible to. It's and this is, I think, one of the and I'm glad we kind of dialogued and understood this, right? It's kind of a common thing when people are struggling with any sort of behavior change. I would say they will rationalize their decisions, right? So when kind of the going is getting tough for you, you notice that your energy is slipping. It may take a lot of work for you to prepare a meal. you're like, okay, I have to go out, and if I'm gonna go out, I might as well, right? And then you fall into that sort of logical trap of justifying or rationalizing sort of unhealthy eating, right? So I think this is a common thing that a lot of folks do, and I think part of it is because there's a little bit of an all or nothing mentality when it comes to, especially when it comes to diet, right? Diet, I think, is a different type of behavior than I would say drugs, right? So when people are trying to quit substances or drugs, abstinence only models can work, right? Obviously, there's no biological need to smoke or imbibe any particular substance, I would say. And so it is possible for someone to be like, I'm going to be really strict. I'm never going to touch this ever again. And there's obviously lots of cases of people who do for long periods of time. When it comes to food, I mean, yes, there are some examples of folks, particularly if they're very stringent about their diets, who can, never touch a piece of meat or never touch a carb, or at least a processed carb, ever again. But I think for most people, it's tough and unrealistic. And so I kind of think moderation-based approaches, particularly when it comes to eating and internet. In fact, this is what I talk about in my dopamine fasting article and protocol. Is I think a superior approach, because the reality is like, look, you're probably going to indulge, whether it's with food or the internet, every once in a while. And so if you build that into the process, then it's not that you're never going to have a sandwich or a burger for the rest of your life. It's just, you're just trying to make it a little bit more of a conscious choice and not sort of an automatic or impulsive one. Whenever you're not feeling good, which is basically going to be at the end of every single week. I think most people, Friday, Saturday rolls around, they're tired, their willpower is sapped, they want to kind of let loose a little bit. And that's why by far the greatest amount of calories that are consumed are always actually on Fridays and Saturdays. In fact, those 2 days single-handedly may be responsible for a lot of the weight gain that you see, where people gain about a pound or two a year in their adulthood. So ironically, if you didn't want to diet all the time, you could take it, in fact, a very paradoxical approach and be really strict on Saturdays and Sundays, basically on the weekends. Friday, Saturdays, maybe a little bit on Sunday as well. And that would probably eliminate a lot of the excess calories, because people are consuming a few hundred extra calories on those days. And it doesn't mean that you should be like really lax during the week, but if that's kind of the most problematic area, the most problematic days, those are the ones that I would focus the most on. So that's kind of one approach, I would say. But I think that stepping back to kind of what you're identifying as kind of the problem, there's a couple things that come to mind that may be helpful. So number one, you've identified an issue of kind of a lack of energy. And I think part of that may be because some of the diets that you're trying are, quite frankly, extreme diets, right? I actually do not recommend a 100% plant-based or 100% animal-based diet for anyone, quite frankly, because both of those are actually non-ancestral. There's not a single civilization that I am aware of in the history of mankind that has sustained a 100% plant-based diet, because it's actually nutritionally deficient. You will get a vitamin B12 deficiency. So before there was modern supplementation, it's literally impossible to be vegan. You would die, and your ancestors would not be able to procreate and pass their genes on. And same thing, there's no cultures that have been 100% animal-based either. A lot of people point to the Eskimos, or more appropriately, the Inuits, as a very heavily carnivorous culture, but even they would go out of their way to find plants, kelp, that they're eating. So even if they're 80-90% carnivorous, they're not 100%. So I think the issue that happens is, especially I would say with the more ketogenic kind of diets that are heavily meat-based, is people tend to develop electrolyte deficiencies on those diets. What happens when you cut your carbs is that your insulin also tends to decrease. And when that happens, it has almost like a diuretic effect. So you will essentially urinate a lot more on a ketogenic or low carb diet, especially at the beginning when your body's adapting to it. And so what happens, because you're urinating more frequently, is you are literally pissing out your electrolytes or your minerals, and the most common of which are sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium. Sodium is not really a problem because people heavily salt their food. So if you're eating burgers and sandwiches, you're probably breaking keto. But even short of that, Even if you're having most people put salt and pepper on their steak, right? So there's no sodium deficiencies people have, but they do miss out on the, particularly the potassium and magnesium. And so when you do that, your energy levels drop, you feel fatigue, you don't feel very good. And that's a major reason why a lot of people quit a low carb or a ketogenic diet. And so I think that may be some of what you're experiencing. So I always tell people keto or carnivore is not really a diet you should actually really do on a whim without a lot of sort of research or preparation, because it's easy to do wrong, quite frankly. And people are just like more or less sensitive to the kind of these electrolyte imbalances. Some people, they don't run into it very often. Maybe it's because some of the other things that they're eating or their body's just kind of built differently. For other people, it totally throws them off. And so what I would actually suggest is maybe you don't need to do this all or nothing thing where the only two options are the standard American diet, where you're eating, quite frankly, shitty processed fast food, or these really extreme diets that, quite frankly, the majority of people do not maintain. We certainly know this from vegan diets. The majority of people who actually do a vegan diet do not stay on it long term for the rest of their lives, unless they're particularly like political, quite frankly, about it. People do not feel better. It's objectively an inferior diet. There's, in fact, some research that suggests that there's like brain atrophy that results from being on a long-term vegan diet. And certainly for men, it lowers your sperm count, sperm quality, and testosterone. So it's highly not recommended for that reason either. I never recommend anyone do that diet in the first place. But even a carnivore diet, I would say, or a very, very strict ketogenic diet is difficult to sustain for most people. There are some people who I would say they either have like very strong impulse control, they're very highly conscientious people, or I don't know, they're very like moral or evangelical about their diets, and so they can stick to these things long term. You, my friend, we've identified that you're probably not one of those people. So why kind of bust your own butt and try to stick on a diet that, quite frankly, is going to be impossible for you to do? I would much rather you, and very much encourage you, to do a reasonably healthy diet that's not in any of these crazy camps or crazy extremes, right? You should eat some plants, you should eat some animals. Quite frankly, you should probably have some burgers and sandwiches every once in a while, although I'm happy to talk to you about how to do that in a healthier way. But I think any sort of extreme is probably not going to work for you. But on the other hand, that doesn't mean you can't do any sort of dietary improvement, right? We have to get out of this black or white mentality of extreme diet or shitty American diet. There is definitely a happy in between. And quite frankly, people can have balanced macros where they're eating a similar amount of protein, fat, and carbohydrates and do fine. I think the main goal, in fact, so here's what I would recommend in terms of picking a diet is I always recommend to everyone that the best diet is the one that you're willing to do and able to sustain long term, right? So you have to kind of like ask yourself deep down in the bottom of your heart, whenever you're picking a dietary plan, it's not just, can I do this for the next 8 to 12 weeks in order to have a beautiful summer bod because summer is coming up. You should be asking yourself, can I do this for the next 8 to 12 years? In fact, 20, 30, 40, 50 years? And would I be happy doing this diet for that long, right? Because we're not just talking about like squeezing into a bikini or board shorts for the summer or looking good in a tux in a wedding. We're talking about literally the rest of your life. So you should think about, what diet am I willing to do basically forever till the day that I die? And when you ask yourself that question, it really feels differently, doesn't it? Right? Where it's like, okay, we're not talking about 5 weeks, we're talking about 50 years. And so it almost by process of elimination eliminates a lot of these sort of extreme diets, unless you're one of those people who you're like, yeah, I can totally eat meat for the rest of my life. If that's the case, God bless you, go do that. But for the rest of folks who are probably a little bit more, I don't know, normal, quite frankly, like you, I would pick something much more reasonable. So let me turn that question back on you. What do you think is a dietary plan that you think you can basically do forever and you look forward to doing?
I think I could eat chicken and rice for the rest of my life. I mean, the way we do it in my culture, we have like 100 different variations of chicken and rice. So I could probably do that if that's healthy. And then maybe I could like cut down on the amount of rice I eat, lower that amount, and maybe even switch it up for brown rice if that's healthier. I'm not sure, but I think I could do that.
That's solid. What's your cultural background, by the way?
I'm Persian.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I definitely love and have eaten a lot of Persian food. And by the way, it's interesting that you mentioned chicken and rice because Persian cuisine in particular, is known for being heavy in the red meat department, right? So you have the kebab, the kubide, which is beef and lamb. This is, I think, actually a really interesting like point of education. I do not think red meat is unhealthy. I don't know why. It's unfortunately been propagated because of the evils of saturated fat, that red meat is unhealthy or it's cancerous. In fact, I always tell people there's not a single randomized control trial that I'm aware of, and please prove me wrong if someone wants to find it, that shows that red meat increases cancer risk. What we're finding instead are these associational, these epidemiological studies that show that people who eat more red meat happen to have more cancer. But it's also like, people who are eating a bunch of processed hot dogs, drinking a bunch of sugary sodas with it, and are totally different socioeconomic status, different lifestyle, different background, it may be associated with the cancer risk. It's not necessarily the red meat itself. So that's the problem with these associational studies, is it really doesn't give you convincing evidence. So first thing I would say is if you are Persian, or quite frankly, you just want to eat good Persian food, you don't have to give up eating kebab, or eating steak, or eating burgers. They can be totally healthy. I do think the quality of the meats are important. If you can afford, obviously, like healthier, grass-fed, organic, that's all great. Even then, if you can't, I still think it's not unhealthy to eat red meat. So you don't have to give up eating red meat first and foremost. Yes, you can eat some chicken too. So if you want to have some, I don't know, fesencun or whatever kind of Persian-based chicken dish, or juja kebab, great, have some of that too. And you can obviously have seafood as well. There's obviously a lot of great fish dishes in Persian cuisine that you can have as well. So I do agree on the rice part. The amount of rice that's probably given at the average Persian restaurant is very high, maybe a little bit of excessive. So I would suggest that you try cutting down a little bit on that. So there's two ways of going about it. I think, in fact, most Persian restaurants, at least here in LA, will let you substitute or swap rice for salad, right? Or vegetables. So you can ask them to do that. Most of the times they're more than willing to do that. So you can have, your 2 skewers of some beautiful kebab, or it's basically filet mignon, and you can have that with salad or vegetables. You can also do half and half. A lot of places will even offer that. They'll do a half order of rice, half order of salad or vegetables. And I think that's reasonable, right? So like I said, do what you're willing to do. For some people, it's not hard to cut out the rice altogether. If that's the case, I would go pure salad or vegetables with some delicious juicy meat. And that's super healthy in my opinion. If it's a little bit harder for you, you really want that rice, then yeah, I would get a half portion, which is a lot more reasonable than a giant bed of fluffy saffron infused rice, which, as delicious as it is, it's the quantity that I think is tough, especially when you're consuming it with that much meat. So it's not the meat that's unhealthy, but certainly if you're consuming a lot of fat with carbohydrates, we tend to know that combination is not very satiating. In fact, it makes us kind of more hungry. So you want to kind of watch eating really high fats with high carbs together. And unfortunately, a giant bed of fluffy rice with kebab is an example of that. So you want to kind of mitigate, I would say, the rice when you're ordering those kinds of dishes. Does that sound something that like you'd be willing to do and able to sustain for a long time?
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds fairly simple for me to do. I think I can do that easily, actually.
Okay, because here's the thing. I would bet, and I'd love to hear back from you in the next couple of weeks. I would bet that, in fact, you can eat a lot healthier. And if you're trying to lose weight, probably lose weight, or at least lose some extra abdominal fat, which I think most guys probably want to do, without doing any extreme diet. In fact, for the majority of people, in fact, there's research that shows this, ironically done by a Persian gentleman who's the dean of nutrition at Tufts University. His name is Dariush Mozaffarian. You can look up the study, or we'll paste the notes afterwards, after this radio show. He showed that basically 66%, or about 2/3 of the standard American diet, as you put it, is ultra processed food, right? So it's these like, super processed hamburger sandwiches, stuff that basically a fast food restaurant would make that you could not make in your kitchen at home, right? Like a Cheeto is a great example of an ultra processed food, right? Or a Slurpee, or it's something that, I don't know, comes out of a factory or a machine, or something you certainly could not make at home, even if you wanted to. 2/3 is basically ultra processed food. I think about 10% is minimally processed food. So an example of minimally processed food would be like a yogurt or a butter. It is stuff that you can make at home. Obviously, it takes a lot of effort. A lot of people don't make it anymore because they're not churning butter or making, homemade yogurt. But it is possible. It's traditional, and people obviously have been making it for thousands of years. So that's like what, 76%. And then the rest, the other like 24, about a quarter of the food is basically unprocessed food, right? So these are just like meats, vegetables, fruit, produce, right? A good hallmark sign of a unprocessed food is basically it has no nutrition label at all, right? Because if you think about the periphery of the grocery store, the produce is just beef or I don't know, a bell pepper or a banana. You know what it is. There's no need for an ingredient list. Only a quarter of our food comes from basically those unprocessed foods. So my encouragement to you would be try to just shift the balance of your diet away from the ultra processed foods to as much as you can to I would say unprocessed and minimally processed food. You're not going to shift 100%. There's very few people who eat 100% unprocessed food unless basically you're cooking all the time and you're very strict. But given that we're starting out with 2/3 and assuming you're a standard American, if you can even cut that down to 1/3, right? Or quarter to a third ultra processed food, and then you're eating, let's say 10% minimally processed food, like those healthy, like yogurt, butter kind of foods. And then that quarter unprocessed food really becomes a half to 2/3 of your diet. You're going to see tremendous benefit in terms of your weight, your biomarkers, and quite frankly, how you feel. So if you find that like these extreme, like, no carb or no meat diets are sapping your energy, there should be no reason in terms of the diet that we just discussed that should be sapping your energy. In fact, I would argue it's going to improve your energy, because when you're cutting out particularly sugars and refined carbohydrates, you're not going to get those blood sugar spikes and crashes that kind of make people go all over the place and makes them pretty wonky in terms of how they feel in their energy levels, right? I think it's so common, in fact, nowadays that the average American just thinks that after they eat, they should be getting sleepy, right? After lunch and dinner. It's not, in fact, the norm. It's because of our really, quite frankly, shitty diets that are very glycemic. They spike our blood sugar. We have a lot of insulin that's released basically right after that, which lowers our blood sugar. And so you get this spike and then this crash afterwards. When you eat a lot more of this unprocessed or minimally processed diet of whole foods, your blood sugar levels, although they do go a little bit up and down, you're not getting this crazy ups and downs as you do. And so your energy levels remain much more stable as well. So that's the first thing I would do. Let's get rid of this extremism of diet. Let's re-educate ourselves that meat is not unhealthy. So you should absolutely have all of the meats in Persian or any other cuisine, quite frankly, that you have. Obviously try to get, like I said, better quality meats if you can afford it or it is available. The one thing I should add, though, is I would be careful about eating out too much. It doesn't mean that you can't do it forever. I certainly do go out and enjoy some good Persian food or whatever food, Mexican food, every once in a while. But the tough thing is about restaurants, and this is the thing that I think, unfortunately, a lot of people miss, is they cook the meats and a lot of the other foods in basically refined seed oils. So these are very common oils like canola oil, which really comes from a plant called rapeseed, which they thought was not very PC, so they had to rename it something sexier sounding, like canola oil. Peanut oil, soybean oil is actually the number one most commonly used oil in the United States. And so when I tweet half jokingly about deep soy on Twitter, I'm also half telling the truth in the sense that it's a highly processed oil and it's everywhere and we can't get away from it. The unfortunate thing is when you go and order at a restaurant, you have no idea what oil that they're using, right? Unless you've done your research, the restaurant, etc. So an example of this, by the way, is McDonald's, surprisingly, even though it gets a lot of bad rap for, certainly they sell a lot of unhealthy things, but the meat that they sell, if you can actually go there, and this is a great, by the way, life hack, food hack trick, is whenever you go to McDonald's, you can actually ask to order things off the a la carte menu. It's not literally on the menu, it's just on the a la carte menu, which means you can order by item. You can ask them, for instance, to order just the quarter-pound patties from the a la carte menu. The meat is actually fresh, it's never frozen. and it's not cooked in any actually oils. It's cooked in its own fat. So literally the only three ingredients in a McDonald's quarter pound patty meat is beef, salt, and pepper. That's it. And so it's actually a great trip when you're traveling and you don't have access to cooking and you want to avoid those refined seed oils. Just order the a la carte, the quarter pound patties from the a la carte menu. So that can be very helpful. If you are going out to eat, if you're willing to talk to the waiter and ask them, I would ask them to not cook it in a refined seed oil. And places like, I would say LA, people are used to making custom orders. So I don't think you're annoying the waiter or the waitress too much. If you do that, just tell them, hey, I would prefer this cooked in butter. Because they always have butter in terms of restaurants. And they should be able to accommodate that. Because nowadays everyone has allergies and other things, and so I don't think they take it in the wrong way if you ask them to avoid that. So it's a highly effective tip that I would recommend. If you're cooking at home, I recommend that you cook in animal fats. So ghee is basically clarified butter, commonly used in Indian cuisine. It's a little better than butter in that it's smoked. It's basically a butter in which the milk solids are skimmed off the top when it's boiled. And so the smoke point is higher. Butter burns in like the 300-degree range. Ghee burns in the 400-degree range. And so you can use it for higher heat cooking, particularly if you're cooking things like steaks. So ghee is great. You can also use lard, which is pig fat, tallow, which is beef fat, or duck fat, if you really want to get fancy. In fact, really delicious French fries, although I don't recommend highly frying food, was originally cooked in duck fat and is much more delicious than cooking it in canola oil, which people are used to. You can also use avocado oil. Avocado oil is not a seed oil. It's literally from the fruit, not the seed. And that has a smoke point of about 500 degrees. So that's a great oil. Olive oil, like real olive oil, is also really healthy, but I don't recommend it for cooking. I recommend it for drizzling on salads because it has a low smoke point. It's like butter. It burns around, I think, the low 300s. The other problem with olive oil is the majority of olive oil on the market is fake and you have no idea. It's like mixed with these refined seed oils. Trader Joe's and Costco do tend to source better. So those oils tend to be more real. So I think you can be relatively safe if you're buying from those places. But like I said, better for drizzling on your food rather than cooking with that. So I think those are all very helpful, sort of dietary tips. So you talked about sort of your energy levels as being sort of one factor. What was the other thing that you mentioned that like typically got in the way? Like when you don't have time to cook, was that it?
Yeah, when I don't have time to cook, I'll just I'll get hungry and I'll just decide to go out and eat. And usually if I'm going to indulge, I tend to overindulge, I guess.
That makes sense. So how do you think you could address that problem? Rather than, because you just know that there's going to be some times where you're feeling tired or lazy or you don't have the willpower to cook. How could you get ahead of that problem?
I could meal prep, or I could plan out my meals better. I think if I just plan my meals out, I'd probably have a better or an easier time being able to avoid that issue.
Totally. So I'm 100% with you there. I've been in that position. And so the way that I avoid it is, and in fact, I wrote a whole series about this called The Cure for Obesity and Diabetes is Processed Food. And basically, I really believe that people need to have emergency food around because there's going to be food emergencies. And what I mean by a food emergency is you're going to be hungry and you're not going to feel like cooking. And if you're in that battle, you're going to lose, right? Because in the moment, you're just going to do the impulsive thing and make bad choices. So instead of fighting your willpower, which is always going to be a tough thing, we basically got to get ahead of it. So if you have the ability to meal prep, I would say, great. That's probably the best and healthiest thing to do. So always basically have a little bit of leftovers or always have like 1 or 2 spare meals, around. If you don't have that, what I would suggest is buying essentially emergency food, right? So Trader Joe's is a great place for this. Literally, they have a lot of like pre-made stuff that you can either literally throw into one pan, one skillet, 5 to 15 minutes cooking, or quite frankly, you can even microwave, right? It's like pre-cooked, you just got to heat it up. I actually always keep like 1 to 2 meals in my freezer for exactly that reason. Like I'm going on a trip tomorrow. I didn't necessarily go grocery shopping. And so if I don't want to necessarily go out and eat, I have backup, essentially emergency food. So That's the second tier. And then the third tier is what I call NutriFoods. And that was what the whole article was about. In fact, I had a whole company that was around this concept. We produced ketogenic meal replacement shakes. And the basic idea was you always have backup food. Even if you're literally traveling, you're on the road, you don't even have access to a kitchen. We have food that doesn't spike your blood sugar levels. All you need is a bottle and water, right? If you're interested, there's the company still exists. I sold the company, but they're still making it. It's called Actualize. You can go to goactualize.com and it literally sells ketogenic meal replacements. And the thing that I always say about it is, look, it's not better than real food. Real food is always going to be the healthiest, superior choice nutritionally. But the problem is it's not a nutrition problem. It's a behavioral problem, right? And so you fight behavioral problems by making it easy to do the right thing. The default behavior should always be the easiest thing to do. And so in those moments of weakness or tiredness or whatever else is going on for you, it might not be a bad idea to have a few shakes, literally just like in your pantry, in your fridge, in your backpack, in your pocket, so that you always have a default or backup food that doesn't involve going out to a fast food restaurant. Now, obviously you have to like it enough that it's going to compete successfully with a burger. But I think there's whether it's a meal prep as option, like first line of defense, second line of defense, some frozen entrees that is reasonably healthy. And then third line of defense, you can have sort of shakes, any or all of those that work for you. But my admonition to you is come up with a backup plan, have backup foods. And so that makes, going out to fast food restaurants, the fourth line, right? So you got to fail all of these options before you decide I'm going to go out to a restaurant and eat kind of a shitty thing, right? Is that something that you think is possible?
Yeah, I think that's definitely possible. It seems like a very obvious way of going about it. I'm definitely going to go out and shop for some of these foods that you recommend.
Absolutely.
I guess,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'll probably make a trip to Trader Joe's right after this call, actually.
Perfect. I love it. Having a plan is always the best thing. So one final note, and this I think gets into sort of this idea of deprivation, right? There's a lot of controversy in sort of the dietary or nutrition community about whether you should have a cheat day or not. I don't think they're necessary. I don't think I recommend them for everyone, but I do think for certain people, it can be helpful to allow some flexibility, right? Because how we talked about earlier, getting away from this all or nothing or black and white thinking that I have to be on an extreme diet or I have to be on a shitty standard American diet. I think it's the same thing with the behavior, right? It's not that you need to be compliant 100% of the time or 0% of the time. 80%, 90% compliance, I think is good enough for most people. And so there's two kind of people that I recommend do actually have sort of cheat days, or if you don't like that term, sort of days in which there's some moderation. So one is kind of folks like you who are really struggling and they really enjoy kind of going out, whether it's for social reasons or other reasons, then you may want to make some flexibility and say, look, one day a week, one afternoon a week, or one meal a week, whatever, is reasonable for you. That's not going to throw you too far off the path. I think it can be reasonable to say, I'm going to have burgers, right? Or whatever of my choice, whatever my favorite thing is. Now, the thing is, you don't want to go nuts, right? It's not like you should go out on the weekend and consume 4,000, 5,000 calories a day, because that really will counteract the 4 or 5 days that you ate healthy. But I think it's reasonable, like I said, if it's one meal, one afternoon, maybe a day, just it doesn't mean you eat trash the whole day, but you can be a little bit, let's say, heavier on the carbs one day. I think that's reasonable if they're reasonably healthy carbs. So I think that can be really helpful. Or second, for athletes, if they're doing what's called a cyclical ketogenic diet, or CKD, they're eating very low carb, basically Monday through Friday. And then from Friday evening to Sunday evening, they're purposely actually having more carbohydrates, although lower fat, in order to replenish their glycogen stores. And that can be a very helpful way for people who need more energy in order to do their workouts, to do that. There's a guy named, I can't remember the original author, but the book is called Body Opus. He's the guy who actually wrote a lot of the underground steroid manuals back in the day. Dan Duchesne, I believe was his name. He's the guy who originated that cyclical ketogenic diet. And then a lot of other folks, Lyle McDonald, and other folks have sort of popularized it. So that can be a reasonable strategy if you particularly find that weekends are your indulgences. I think that can be a reasonable kind of thing to do. But remember, the goal is basically during the week, you go low carb, high fat. During the weekends, you go high carb, low fat. So it's not a I can have whatever I want on the weekends or that cheat day, and I'm just eating, ice cream and hot dogs, right? It's actually flip-flopping it. And so you have to actually be careful about what meat you're eating on the weekends. If you're going to be eating a lot of rice, then yes, maybe a leaner meat like chicken or fish would be appropriate on those weekends. During the week, you could actually have the red meat that you want that's fattier, but you're not going to have it with carbohydrates, right? So you're inverting sort of the macros between the weekdays and the weekends. So I think it can be reasonable. And then finally, what I would suggest though is to come full circle to this conversation is what we talked about in terms of just because you're going out does not mean you might as well just eat trash, right? So what I would suggest is if you really love burgers, let's say that's your kind of cheat thing, go have burgers once a week. It doesn't mean that you need to deprive yourself, but you may want to change it up in terms of how you're eating those burgers. First of all, I recommend most people skip the shitty sauce that they smear all over the burgers, right? It's actually very unnecessary calories. You don't need it for flavor. You can have a little bit of ketchup and mustard. It's totally fine, but they just drizzle sauce. So I always tell them to skip the sauce whenever you go to In-N-Out or wherever you like to eat. Put on your own condiments, right? You can go get salt, pepper, ketchup, mustard, whatever it is. Put it on yourself. You'll put it on in a much more reasonable amount than when they smear Thousand Island dressing or mayo all over your burger. So that's number one. Second is if you are trying to do a lower carb kind of burger, get it protein style. Almost all places will allow you now to get a protein style burger. They wrap it obviously in lettuce, tomatoes, onions, if you like onions, grilled onions, etc. And so you can have your burger. I certainly do when I go to In-N-Out or like I said at McDonald's. It's quite enjoyable. The enjoyment from the burger comes from the meat. It doesn't come from the bun, to be honest with you. Yeah, it's like a plus, don't get me wrong, but you can have most of your cake and eat it too, I would say, when you're doing so. So don't deprive yourself. Like if you decide, okay, whatever, McDonald's, In-N-Out once a week, get it protein style, skip the sauce, but you can still have a reasonably enjoyable burger. You'll get 80+% of the enjoyment out of it, and you don't feel like you're deprived, but you're doing it in a conscious way that you're choosing, and it's still aligned with your health, still aligned with your goals. And so you can make a reasonable trade-off between enjoyment and your health, and it doesn't have to be black or white. Is that something that you think you can do?
Yeah, it sounds pretty straightforward. I will disagree though. The bun is a lot more flavorful than the meat.
Fair enough. Which if you want to have, like I said, you have to just, what I would suggest in that case is if you really decide like, okay, well, either you're going to say, okay, it's fine. I would prefer it with the bun, but because of my health goals, I'm going to skip it. That's a reasonable choice. If you decide, no, the reason I want to do it is I just want the full flavor, fine. You can have that once in a while, as long as it fits your macros, right? So there's kind of this mantra in the dietary community that says, if it fits your macros, like IIFYM, I think is the acronym, which look, if you're eating a relatively healthy diet, you're not going crazy on the calories. Sure, you can have some carbs every once in a while, right? You can wrap your sandwiches in some pita bread or some relatively reasonable bread. Or if once a week is the only time that you're eating the buns or the bread, and you're eating relatively healthy the rest of the time, you're probably going to be fine, and you're probably going to eat relatively healthy, and you're going to lose weight and have all the other benefits, assuming it's only once a week, right? If you're talking about multiple times throughout the week and you're eating all the other shit that comes with it, yeah, that's obviously going to be unhealthy. So like I said, if it's calculated, it's controlled, and it's reasonable, and it fits your macros, then sure, you can do it. But you may want to kind of like test it out and figure that out along the way. Great question, and thank you for your willingness to kind of like walk it through me and kind of discuss it, because it makes it so much more interesting to kind of hear the dialogue.
Yeah, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Let us know how it goes in one of the later shows. It could be next week or a few weeks from now. I'd love to hear your progress, and most importantly, if you're I don't know if you're in any of the squads, but for everyone who's listening out there, if you've heard or taken inspiration from Michael and this conversation, you want to make some better nutrition goals for the upcoming year, join our squads on Discord. And we basically put guys into groups of 10, and they're basically accountability groups. So if Michael joins the squad and he says, okay, my goal is to eat a, relatively unprocessed diet, 80-20 is fine. It doesn't have to be perfect. Then that's going to be my goal for the week. And then, once a week on the weekends, I'm going to go out and have a burger and enjoy myself. When I go out for Persian food, I'm going to, split the rice in half with some salad, but I can still have, my kebabs and my red meat. that's my goal, and I want people to keep me accountable, and I don't want to do it more than once a week. Share that with your group, let them know about that, and the guys will hold you to it. So feel free to join that, and I think it'll help with your sticking to it a lot better than just doing it on your own.
Hey, what's up? So a lot of us are fathers and bigger, older brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And do you have any advice for younger people in the lower teens range on how to cope with the shutdown? Because there's a lot of struggle, a lot of pent-up energy, and even suicidal ideation.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I think it's it's tough for everyone in different ways. I don't think inherently it's tougher for any particular group, except for maybe older folks, in that they're probably more threatened by coronavirus than anyone else. So maybe they have more of a justification. But I do think it is, to your point. I would say particularly school age men and women, or kids and adolescents, right? It's a totally different experience being at home and being at Zoom high school or Zoom university. It's just exhausting to do that for 8 hours a day. And B, the social component, which I think is probably half the benefit of school, is kind of missed out on as much as possible. So on this note, I actually tweeted the results of a study that was looking at what has changed from 2019 to 2020, comparing basically pre-quarantine to post-quarantine. And there were some really interesting findings. So one of them was the amount of sedentariness or the decrease in walking has changed significantly. So tip number one, I tell this to everyone, is everyone needs to walk more, because just literally walking, even if it's walking from your car to the parking lot of your school or university, or walking from class to class, you weren't even necessarily trying to walk, but now you're home all the time, you're just not doing it. So people need to pay attention to their step counts. I encourage everyone should be aware of how many steps or miles, whatever the metric is, that you're walking a day. And even teens, should pay attention to it, even if it's not for whatever weight loss or the other reasons. But I would say make it fun, make it social. If you're like younger, I would say go with your family. I think I encourage families to just do an evening walk after dinner as a family. I think it can be great. And if not, find a buddy, find a friend that you're willing to do that too with. It could be a sibling, could be a friend, it could be a neighbor. So that's number one. Second, physical activity has gone down. So in terms of formal exercise, I think it's tough because, we don't have gyms or formal sports that people may be doing. So, but I think the goal there is to just adapt and improvise. There's a lot of opportunities now with YouTube to exercise at home. In fact, I always recommend my buddy's JT's Bodyweight Strength Training Guide. And we have a PDF actually version of that coming out pretty soon as well. So find some exercise that you like, just like the diet that you're willing to do, at least for the duration of the quarantine. I think that's really critical. Number three, change that's actually been noted is the amount of screen time has gone up dramatically. Like people were using maybe an hour or two of screen time, and now it's gone up to something like 6. Now, part of that may be obviously because people for school or work have been using Zoom more. But aside from that, I think a lot of people are just using social media more as well. So certainly, as you all know, I've promoted and popularized dopamine fasting. So I think that's actually really important too, is try to cut off the technology, computer, social media, at least 1 hour, maybe even 2, 3, 4 hours before you go to bed. It's just going to improve your sleep quality so much and just let you unplug a little bit. Same thing, 1 day a week, one weekend a quarter, 1 week a year is the recommended sort of dopamine fasting protocol. So that's that. And then finally, this is the social aspect of it. The amount of quality social time, particularly for young people, I think is decreased. And I think that's where you have to kind of get creative, like FaceTime, Snaps, whatever kind of kids like to use or teens like to use. There can be creative ways of doing it. Obviously, it is great to meet in person if you can do that safely. I think if you're responsible about wearing masks, testing, walking outside or hanging out outside is reasonably safe, given taking relative precautions. So I think folks can kind of do that in a relatively safe way. I think the positive is, teens, although they do need to be responsible, are less susceptible to COVID. And so, I don't think they need to at least existentially fear as much in terms of negative repercussions, but, they should obviously still be responsible. So I think those are all kind of effective things that young folks can certainly do that. And those are good evidence-based strategies for, in fact, preventing or treating depression anyway, right? So you mentioned sort of the depression or suicidal ideation that a lot of people are experiencing. All of those health behaviors are preventative or prophylactic and can be very helpful for folks to not progress that far. Now, obviously, if someone legitimately is depressed, struggling with suicidal thoughts, then of course I would recommend as a psychologist that you seek mental health treatment. Fortunately, there are a lot of resources out there, especially during this time. We can actually post some links after this podcast to some mental health resources that no matter where you are in the country, you can look up. There's a lot of free like chat lines, hotlines, national suicide hotlines that people can literally call. It's free. That's available 24/7. I highly recommend it. But yeah, if it's more of an ongoing issue too, I would recommend that people find a clinician that they can work with long-term. And it's totally fair. Like this is kind of an acute stressor for not only individuals, but for the world. And it's not a bad idea to get help for whether it's a few weeks or a few months to get through this tough time.
Yeah, those are some really great ideas. I'll be passing them on.
Yep, will do. And the thing is, I like that, by the way, that you mentioned, the different roles that guys play, right? Whether you're a father, whether you're a brother, or maybe you're just a friend, right? And if you're noticing this in someone else, I think the best thing you can do, you can obviously pass along those tips, make sure that people are getting their mental health resources met. But there's a lot that you can do as well. I don't think the burden of responsibility obviously falls on you to treat people with mental health or be their therapist per se. But, certainly in terms of like reducing their loneliness and just feeling supported. I think we talked on a previous podcast about just, like having conversations and validating people, how powerful active listening is. And just, knowing that someone cares about them and being available for them, checking in with them once in a while can be really helpful. And part of it too, maybe gently kind of pushing people to do some of those things, right? Like we talked about walking. Walking is like a low activation energy kind of thing. A lot of people won't necessarily go out of their way to do it on their own, even as easy it is as it is. But if you're like, hey, let's go for a walk and talk, a lot of people will be like, sure, let's go do that. Let's go take a lap around the block, or let's go walk to the convenience store and grab some water or whatever it is. And so, if you're the person who's being more proactive and taking the initiative, a lot of people will follow. So I think a lot of what we can do as men is to be good role models, right? And do things together with our, siblings, friends, coworkers, etc. And kind of, exemplify those positive health behaviors.
Yeah, totally agree. That makes sense. What do you do for desserts? I know you do keto. I believe you're still doing it. What do you do to satisfy your sweet tooth?
Yeah, great question. I would say I eat actually like relatively low carb. I probably in reality kind of swing in and out of keto. So I don't follow it super strictly or super religiously. I would say I'm probably keto during the week. And then when I occasionally go out, I try not to be too annoying to other people. I am like pretty fit, not trying to lose any weight, so I can tolerate carbohydrates actually like decently well. It doesn't necessarily like hugely spike my blood sugar. If I was a little bit more pre-diabetic or diabetic, I actually probably would be more strictly keto. And there may be a time in my life that I will need to be. But for now, yeah, I think like 5-6 days a week is probably pretty good enough for me. So that's what I do. I'm not a huge sweet tooth in the first place, I would say, in terms of even if I'm not doing keto, I don't necessarily crave desserts. The only thing I really like is like chocolate, I would say. There's in fact keto chocolates now, so you can certainly have your cake and eat it too in that respect. I think there's like a company that makes like these chocolate barks. You can buy it on Amazon. It's actually pretty good. What I love about it, by the way, is not only does it not have sugar, but the packets are like 1 ounces, which is really great because, like a chocolate bar is generally 3.4 ounces or 100 grams. It's a huge amount. Like you shouldn't be eating that much chocolate. It's just too much fat in one serving. So these are actually like much more like single serving sizes. And it's a great example of behaviorism, right? Like you're much more likely to eat whatever's in one package just because it's packaged like that. Even though obviously people can break a chocolate bar in half, they're less likely to. So I recommend that. In fact, there's keto ice cream now, believe it or not, that at least Costco in Southern California carries. The primary ingredients are like cream, egg yolks, pretty like, natural stuff. The only thing is they do use erythritol, which is a sugar alcohol, along with monk fruit and stevia, which are natural plant-based sweeteners. I don't mind the monk fruit and stevia as much. Erythritol is not great, but it's way better than sugar. So from a harm reduction perspective, I'm like, if you're going to have ice cream, I'd certainly better to have keto ice cream. So that's actually not bad. Definitely it counts as dessert and satiates the sweet tooth. So I think those are both actually great substitutes for traditional chocolate and ice cream, which are probably too sweet for everyone, I would say. So I would say, you don't necessarily need to give up your favorite things, but you might want to try healthier versions of it. And I would say keto or less processed or lower glycemic versions of food exist a lot now. You just might need to like find different stores or obviously look online for them. But generally, I would say I get most of my carbohydrates and I guess my sweet craving from fruit. Fruit is nature's dessert. So, in line with what I was talking about with Michael earlier in terms of focusing on unprocessed or minimally processed foods, fruit is a great example of that. Now, the thing is, you don't want to go absolutely nuts with fruit. Not all fruit is created equal. I have a colleague at UCSF Medical School, Dr. Robert Lustig, who calls grapes little bags of sugar, basically. I do not recommend grapes as delicious as they are. They're very glycemic. They impact your blood sugar levels a lot. But berries are probably the best fruit. Strawberries, blackberries, raspberries, and maybe blueberries. They're a little bit more sugary, but they're not bad either. All of those are very healthy choices. And you can obviously have them with some Greek yogurt or any way that you want them. I think they're a great carbohydrate choice and they're obviously delicious. So those are great choices. The other category of fruits that are really healthy are what are called stone fruits. So stone fruits are basically things that have a large seed in the pit. So you think about like a peach or a nectarine or any of these new hybrids that they have, pluots and whatnot. All of those are actually relatively lower in sugar, higher in fiber, less glycemic impact. So that's like the second bucket of fruits that I would focus on. Sure, you can have a little bit the tropical fruits as well, like things like pineapples and bananas and all those things. I would just watch the amount that you're consuming, right? Because those are tropical fruits. They're probably not indigenous to either where you're maybe or maybe not mangoes, but certainly not indigenous to the United States. So we're not used to eating like a ton of tropical fruits. At least most people aren't. If you are consuming like the higher sugar fruits, just watch the quantity. You don't need to eat like a whole pineapple in one sitting. A lot of places will slice them and you can have them in much more reasonable portions. So I would say fruit is a much better choice, and fruit that's higher in fiber as well. Oranges actually are not too sugary. Apples are a great choice as well. They're high in pectin, which is basically a prebiotic fiber, and it slows the absorption of sugar from apples. You can also eat too many apples. Like try eating more than 2 apples a day. We actually did this once at my previous company, Omada Health. They're very filling, right? Like once you've had 2 apples, I mean, you may want to eat some other stuff. Maybe you want to eat some meat, but you can't just gorge on apples for the most part. So I think it's actually reasonable to eat a decent amount of fruit. I do encourage people to eat organic if you can afford it, just because I think pesticides are a real problem, and some of these chemicals are endocrine disrupting. So we talk a lot about hormone optimization and testosterone. So I do think an important part of that is to make sure you're not poisoning, quite frankly, yourself. And unfortunately, from produce, vegetables, and fruit are the number one source of where we get our pesticides. Meat is actually relatively clean compared to produce in our country. So that's something I would kind of watch out for. But the thing is, if you look at kids, we were talking about teenagers earlier. I think they naturally don't necessarily like vegetables, and that maybe is actually a sign that evolutionarily we didn't eat a lot of vegetables. Most of the vegetables anyway that are in our supermarket are basically derivatives of brassica, or like broccoli, cauliflower. They're all derived essentially from this one wild mustard plant that we've just bred to, accentuate the leaves, the flowers, or the, whatever it is, the different parts of the plant. But yeah, I mean, kale is not delicious. I don't think any kid probably likes kale, or anyone, quite frankly, likes most salads if it doesn't have dressing on it and it's sweetened in some way, or has olive oil or lemon juice or a bunch of other things that we add to make it more delicious. But fruit, if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, we basically co-evolved with fruit, because humans and other mammals ingest fruit. We ingest the seed that comes along with it, because obviously when we go poop it out, you're basically fertilizing the seed so it grows into, a new fruit tree. And so nature is probably, encourage these things to be sweet and healthy for us, to encourage us to almost like reward us for eating it. The thing is though, other plants don't have sort of natural defenses like, vegetables. And so they don't want to be eaten, and they have a lot of anti-nutrients that actually block the absorption of a lot of the nutrients. And that's why things like spinach and kale, if you're consuming too many of them in your, green smoothies, can cause kidney stones and other sort of issues. Fruits have less of those anti-nutrients because, like I said, we have evolved naturally in conjunction with nature to consume them. So I think fruit in moderation, along with a reasonably balanced diet, is a great dessert and great substitute. And by the way, one great food trick or hack is, if you do like kind of the ice cream or the sweet stuff, you can freeze it. Like frozen berries, frozen strawberries and stuff. If you suck on it or chew on it, obviously don't break your tooth, can taste a lot like a strawberry kind of a popsicle or a kind of ice cream. And so that can be a great way of kind of getting that sweetness as well in a different sort of texture.
Awesome, thanks. I'll go get some apples right now.
Love it. All right, everyone. Really, really great call-in radio show today. A lot of nutrition questions today, but I'm always happy to talk about it. It's kind of an expertise of mine. I spent a lot of time with the last two companies, literally, that I started working in the nutrition space. So it's definitely something that's near and dear to my heart. And obviously, if you're trying to, progress on your New Year's resolutions here in February, it's an important time. This is the time, literally, like basically after a month or so, that people start really relapsing on their New Year's resolutions. So I think, we're starting to get some sense of that from some of the questions. But it's also a great time to stay strong. Like I said, join our accountability groups, our squads on our Discord in order to do that. And it's a great opportunity for us to, ask questions, iterate, and improve using whether this call-in radio show or techniques like the Keystone Habit that I've talked about on previous episodes as well. So I will follow up. You guys can hang out and chat after the radio show if you want to meet sort of the other community members. Happy to do that. Otherwise, I'll post links in the Dr. Cam radio show channel on Discord with some follow-ups for this conversation. So thanks, everyone. Have an excellent Thursday. Keep healthy in terms of your diet, and hope to hear from you 2 weeks from now. We're actually going to skip next week. I'm going to be out traveling, but look forward to rejoining you in 2 weeks' time.